All right. Happy Tuesday. I am back with another Learning Tech Talks where I am continuing to explore the landscape of learning technology, cutting through the fluff. We're doing lots of stuff today. We're gonna have a good conversation. I am joined by Josh Camrath. He is back. We were talking about this. He was on the show almost 2 years ago. It's been almost 2 years now, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was
Yeah, for
it was
sure.
pre-pandemic, which is a little weird to think. So there was no pandemic at the time that we talked last. And he's with Bongo, which we're going to unpack what that is so that, anybody who hasn't seen the previous one or is unfamiliar, we'll talk a little bit about that. But I am legit excited to talk about what's been going on with Bongo over the last 2 years because I got the early preview backstage, but there's some pretty cool stuff happening that you're going to want to at least listen to, because I think from the technology standpoint, you're doing some cool stuff in democratizing access, and we're really going to be talking about validating people's capability. We talk a lot about, improving skills, improving capability, but a lot of times it's like, how are you measuring that? Do you actually know that? And I think that's it. So, but Josh, you've since moved. Last time you were on the show, you were in California. You're not in California anymore.
Exactly. Yeah. So a lot of life change for me and my family. We moved from San Diego to my hometown of Loveland, Colorado, which is actually where Bongo is based, and
Okay.
generally all of our engineering
It's where I
teams
grew up too, by the way.
is out of his office. So, so we moved about a year ago. Also have a new baby, so a toddler. And we actually have a second boy coming in July, so a little more than a month away. So lots of personal life change too for me.
Yeah, both professional and personal life changes, which are always fun. Well, on my end, nothing's changed. Everything's pretty much the same. Actually, quite a lot has changed since we last talked. But I think everybody listening already knows most of that stuff. So for those of you who are just getting joined in, feel free to let us know where you're joining from. And again, we're going to be digging into some pretty interesting stuff. So I would encourage you to ask questions along the way, because there may be some things that go, wait a minute, what? That doesn't, I'm not jiving with what you're talking about. So feel free to ask, because this is one of those ones where I might get a little bit techie and geeky. And when that happens, sometimes things start flying that people aren't always following. So keep me honest, those of you watching or listening. But so Josh, let's talk a little bit about, let's do the founder story first, because I think it is worth kind of revisiting how you ended up with a video workflow platform, and what made you get into that?
Yeah, so the company was actually founded about 10 years ago by a tenured professor, and he set out to solve his own problem, which originally we started in education, higher education, which was having a learner or learners give a presentation, like a public speaking presentation or a foreign language, and then get and receive feedback around that. Really, the last 3 years since I became CEO, we've really been shifting more towards corporate. Certainly this year, actually have more corporate learning business than education.
But you're still working in both.
Yeah,
spaces.
we still have I would say probably about 7 million users in education, so it's a big footprint. But we have a lot of users now. So corporate learning this year is actually surpassing the education,
hitting that threshold where it's crossing over.
Exactly, and that's an amazing thing. And because that original vision with just facilitating a presentation has really evolved into our primary focus absolutely is in the corporate sector. And it's really centered around holding learners accountable to what they're learning. And that's facilitated through video assignments, right? So both having a learner demonstrate that they can articulate or demonstrate a skill or competency. And then certainly in the corporate space, that's generally or historically been hard to evaluate, especially at scale. And that's what a lot of
it's very hard to do at scale. I think that's the biggest piece. I mean, I just think back to your kind of initial example. I just think back to even my high school days where you had to prepare your presentation and then you go in front of the group, and then it was videotaped, and it was the worst. You like had to, I mean, it was legit. You had to prepare for it because like you can go up there and flub it, but everybody's gonna see it, and you're gonna have to watch it back and go, I cannot believe that I did that. And it doesn't end at high school or college. Like you're doing this. You're doing this professionally on a regular basis, going in front of people.
And that's exactly it. Is it turns out almost every job requires people to talk to other people, and that's what
shocking.
Bongo, unless you're just in the basement mining Bitcoin or something, like you generally have whether it's a customer success interaction, a sales interaction, a leadership development. We have a lot of membership organizations with like healthcare or nursing. United Health Group is one of our larger customers, where they're like literally, in that case, literally demonstrating a skill. Like one of my favorite use cases is within nursing is having a learner basically plop down a chicken breast, like a cold chicken breast, make an incision, and then they have to demonstrate the actual skill of giving that chicken breast stitches. And they're also talking about the different steps. So, it's not just, sales or customer success.
No, and I think sometimes that's where it gets kind of pegged. It's like, salespeople, they do it because they're doing pitches and customer things. And it's like, no, I mean, if you're a people leader, you're having conversations with your people. If honestly, you may even just be pitching something that you want to do as a priority to your boss or whatever, and go like, I mean, where do I practice doing that? You don't. Exactly. It happens more than you think when you actually start digging down to the behaviors.
Absolutely. And and so that's really a little bit of the history of the company. I would say another kind of caveat is historically we've been an embedded solution. So Bongo's powered this functionality inside of other learning management systems or content providers. And we still absolutely do that and have a huge emphasis on it, but more
because when we talked 2 years ago, that was really you couldn't necessarily go, hey, that sounds really interesting, we'd like to use Bongo. It was like, well, not really the way it works. It was infused into other tools where you could say, well, these platforms are powered by Bongo, they have these video workflows built into it, but that has since changed.
Exactly. So it's changed. And like we were talking about with, kind of pre-COVID, we still had a huge user base, but being able to, once COVID happens,
did you see that spike?
Oh my gosh, it was like insane. Both from a usage standpoint and how people are using it, but that's now that the pandemics in general, like people are going back to work or but what's changed, like almost philosophically, is the one-on-one skill demonstration, or like having a learner be coached or have feedback provided by a mentor or peer. Historically, that was done in a face-to-face environment, which obviously doesn't scale very well. And now that tools like Bongo have become more ubiquitous and available and refined, organizations have figured out that skill demonstration, helping learners or people better articulate the knowledge that they're supposed to be learning, right? Like, and we not to go too into the product too quickly, but that's a huge gap from my perspective. Like, it might be a little biased, but when I was in college or going through corporate development training or professional development training, there's a lot of watch this video, take this quiz. And, again, I'm biased, but like, is that really a good demonstration of like applied knowledge? I would argue, no, not really. Like, there's a time and a place for it, but really Bongo and having learners record themselves demonstrating in a real world context that knowledge, and then being evaluated and have feedback provided and being held accountable through algorithms. And
there's a level. Yeah.
It's a whole other level.
I think, and I saw some recent research come out in terms of, how people, their preferences towards learning and this and that. And I mean, I think does consumption play a big role? Sure, it does. And it always will. You can't say, well, is there never going to be a knowledge consumption component? No, I think that's not going away, and it shouldn't. But your point of Yeah, but how do you demonstrate that that knowledge has actually translated into action? Like, it's one
Exactly.
thing to say, "Oh yeah, I know how to do that."
Yeah,
So
but
let's
can it
see
be
you do it.
applied?
You're right. Can you actually, like, oh wow, no, actually you're pretty terrible still.
Yeah.
Keep practicing. And I think your point that you made about and we don't have to get into the whole pandemic, work from home,
Mhm.
remote, like, because that debate just drives me bananas. But I think your point of the expectation has changed over the
Mhm.
last 2 years, where it used to be more acceptable to say, we recognize skill demonstration is important, but in order for that to happen, we have to wait for the opportunity for, people to be here or be there or someone to physically connect with them. And we've demonstrated over the last 2 years that's not the case. But the tech wasn't there. I mean, it has
Exactly.
historically not been there, but now it is. And
Mhm.
the expectation from employees of, you want me to travel in to show you how to sew a chicken breast? Like,
Yeah.
I can sew a chicken breast on my kitchen counter and show
Exactly.
you I know how to sew a chicken breast. But before it was like, yeah, but how would anybody ever see or evaluate that?
Mhm.
And it sounds like you're just making that much more accessible.
That's exactly correct. And really it boils down to the age old adage of what gets measured gets done.
Yeah.
Bongo is the measuring stick. The ability for organizations, whether it's subject matter experts, L&D departments, sales or customer success departments, to actually measure, hey, did this learning that I just spent, invested a lot of time and money in, was it actually worth it? Like, Bongo helps and facilitates the measuring of, they actually learn something and they
Okay.
can apply that something.
So I am curious with this, because you've now seen this, so you've seen different creative use cases as
Mhm.
people have done. And again, to me, this is where, as we talk about some of this stuff and as we talk about kind of where the platform's gone, this is where I think, if you're a designer watching or listening, thinking about this is where, when we start thinking about the broader user experience design and we go, how do we actually demonstrate competency and how do we do this in a way that's user centric? It is about doing it in a way that, well, it's easy for them to do. They can
Mhm.
actually demonstrate capability. It's not burdensome, type of a thing. I'm curious, what have you seen with some of the best practices around this? If you have some of that, just again, we don't have to take a ton of time digging into this, but you've obviously shared some different use cases, because again, it a lot of
Sure.
times gets painted in the corner of, well, that's like sales pitches.
Mhm.
Okay, that's one of like 10 million possible use cases for it. But then there's also this, well, how do you use it? Are you finding people are using it as kind of a capstone at the end of something? Are they integrating it into a bit of a learner journey so that they're
Mhm.
actually developing along the way? Is it both? And I mean, I've got my perspective on how I think it could be used, but I'd love to just see how
Sure.
you're seeing it used.
Yeah, I would say, how it's being used, like all of the above.
Okay.
But again, we have millions of users, so that's indicative of just how
But
tools
yeah,
get
millions of
adopted.
users is going to give you a lot of different usages.
Yeah, but I would say, to answer your question more pointedly, in the flow of the learning is
Okay.
where we see the best outcomes delivered. And like another example is, we have one of our customers is Telestra, so it's like
Okay.
Verizon or AT&T in Australia, and they're using it for training their call center organization, right? So
Okay.
they have thousands of call center people that are measured on, can they quickly close support tickets, or can they have a positive experience and interaction with their customers. And they're using Bongo, so they have their training material, right? And that training material is mostly consumption based, as I'm sure you can imagine. And now they're sprinkling Bongo video assignments into
Okay.
that material
Throughout the pathway.
throughout the path of the learning path, so that those learners can learn something and then show that they can apply what they learned in a real world application. And then one step further, through machine learning and AI tools, what we call auto analysis, they're able to receive automated feedback that's judgmental free, right? So
Okay.
feedback that's not coming from a boss. Certainly it can, but they
Yeah.
don't have to feel like they're getting judged, or or self, critical, and that environment is much
Quick
more
rapid fire
conducive.
feedback just
Yeah,
on like, hey, here's
super.
some things to take away from this, things you
Exactly,
might want to
right.
consider.
You said a bunch of filler words, or man, you missed, like, this was a key phrase in this piece
You
of
did not
material and
say
you missed
this.
it. Exactly.
Okay. Yep.
And the tool auto analysis can automatically identify
Okay.
and provide feedback around that learning.
So picking up on some of those communication pieces, even again, and I think this is where this whole, I've been in conversations where we've had this debate where it's, well, where can AI play that role in that? And it's not a replacement of that human development or coaching,
Exactly.
but there are enough things that, I mean, machine learning can quickly say, you're talking too fast. Nobody can even understand what you're saying. Or like you said 37 times in that 1 minute clip. You might want to just get a
that's
little more comfortable type of stuff.
Precisely what the tool can do. And maybe another great use case is or a lot of us, I'd imagine, have eaten at Chick-fil-A. That's one of our customers, and if you've ever after you order, go up and ask for some ketchup, they give it to you, and they almost always say, you say thank you, they say my pleasure, right?
Yeah.
There's specific key phrases that they've invested a lot of energy and effort
to part of the culture.
Their workforce. Yeah, it's part of the culture. So Bongo can facilitate that interaction and then measure, did they say that thing? And Chick-fil-A, like, that's I think an example that we can all relate to. But it certainly can be applied towards like software sales or GDPR compliance, or, again, fill in the blank. There's lots of use cases and ways the tool can be leveraged.
I mean, even difficult conversations you may have with an employee. There are like certain things that are like, do not say this type of a thing that you can just put in as watch outs. And again, I think that's one of those perfect use cases when you think about where can machine learning and AI scale some of this and increase the speed of feedback without saying, oh, so you're saying you don't need a person. No, that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is you can augment that human feedback with faster, more actionable, just kind of like didactic stuff. As we're talking about this, though, folks, who are listening, and I know from the Restream episode, a lot of people listen, they put it in another tab, and then they continue their work. So you may have to tab back to do this. But I am curious what other folks are doing to incorporate kind of that application piece, because this is commonly a place that is neglected heavily. It's and I get it. It's sometimes has been perceived as very difficult to scale, things like that. Or you put a quiz at the end and they go, well, they got 80%. So it's probably fine, even though they got unlimited tries. And after the first attempt, they could go review their answers. Like, I love those quizzes, by the way, because you just rocket through. So anyway, we'd just love to hear what other folks are doing with this. But so these use cases, things like this, but what we talked about was this was limited to, at least last time we talked, platforms you already had strategic partnerships with. So, if you had the platform that was powered by Bongo, you could use this. But if you said, wow, that kind of video workflow thing, that could be an interesting tool, and you didn't have that platform, it really wasn't even an option. Now, you've since changed that. That is one of the big changes, correct?
Correct. Yeah, that's exactly correct. So in the past, you effectively had to use one of our partner platforms, whether it's Desire to Learn or Intrepid or Loop or Brainier, or we have 14 or 15 different partners that the tool was embedded in. As of actually just a month and a half ago, Bongo both now has standalone support, but also has SCORM capability. So what that means is, an administrator can be working in any tool that supports SCORM, and then embed Bongo assignments in, again, the learning pathway of that platform. And there doesn't have to be a deep integration or a reseller type partnership like we've have with some of those organizations I listed. And, the listeners or any of our users can be operating in tools like Learn-Upon or 360 Learning or Absorb, or kind of, again, fill in the blank LMS, and
as long as it's supporting SCORM.
As long as it supports SCORM, which is quite ubiquitous, and you can just plop these, hold the
Because
learners
you're using
accountable.
and again, we're getting kind of geeky and technical here, but you're using a pass through essentially, right? So the
Yeah.
swarm object's sitting there and then it's passing through back to,
Correct.
the Bongo capability somewhere else.
Exactly. Yep, that's exactly correct. So from the learner standpoint, they just, go through the learning pathway, and then there's a video assessment or video assignment that's powered by Bongo. And instead of it being purchased through the LMS, it would be more contracted through directly with Bongo. But from a usability standpoint or like a learner standpoint, they just, digest the material, digest the course, be held accountable to that material through Bongo, again, in the flow of that learning path, and then continue forward with the learning curriculum. So it's pretty slick.
What's interesting about this though, and when we were talking about it backstage, and this goes to anybody kind of in the design user architecture space, this does, in many regards, one, it's a possibility to open up your design portfolio a bit, which I think is extremely helpful, because I've worked with lots of designers where they go, we'd maybe like to go beyond just digital content, but when that's the only tool in your woodshed, it's kind of like,
exactly.
I mean, I don't know what else you really want us to do. And again, we talked about it, the manual method of doing this, trying to set up.
Yeah, completely unwieldy, right?
It's a night. I have been in organizations and more than once tried to set up. Wouldn't it be great if we could have people do this and then they could just record a video themselves and then they'll drop it on a SharePoint drive and send an email notification? And you're like, just forget
too many clicks.
Just honestly forget it. No, people are going to be calling you going, how do I make a video type of a thing? You're like, just never mind.
Sure.
But I think that's where this does impact the way designers are thinking about design architecture, because the examples you've given so far, you have to start thinking about that holistic learning experience instead of just the content object. You have to think about it as a holistic development pathway.
Exactly. And that's, you're speaking exactly Bongo's DNA, right? So there's a bunch of learning science like Kirkpatrick model or experiential learning model, where there's actual science supporting, hey, if you can demonstrate your skills, that's a much better representation that you're actually learning, as opposed to just regurgitating on a quiz. And for the L&D professionals, what we've seen working the last few years in corporate L&D, when we interact, like you were just mentioning, when we interact with an L&D shop, their customer, if you will, is the sales team or the customer success team at that organization. And historically, it's been difficult to prove ROI. And that's really where Bongo is like a home run for L&D organizations, is, the customer success team, like, they might ask the L&D team to create all this, spend a huge amount of energy,
a lot of time and money making this stuff.
Exactly.
A lot of time and money.
And then it's like, okay, that you have all your customer success professionals go through that learning, and there's a question mark at the end of like, well, was it worth it? Bongo allows the L&D organizations to show ROI to the leaders of, in this case, the customer success organization. And they can show like, hey, that team of, whether it's 30 or 300 or 3,000 people, this chunk of people all did excellent according to auto analysis. And, there's maybe of 3,000, maybe there's 100 people that like we should spend a little more time on helping them because they've struggled applying what they learned. And again, it's from a time management, time saving standpoint, huge, but more so, in my opinion, like just being able to, show demonstrably like, hey, this was worth it.
They can do it.
Yeah, they can do it. And this is worth the investment for the organization.
So there's two things I want to jump on this one, because a lot of times we toss these terms around a lot, but then when you scratch beneath the surface and go, but like ROI is one, L&D to the return on learning, and it's like, in what sense? And a lot of times we are held hostage because let's use your use case. Let's flesh that out. You put all this time into this learning pathway.
Yeah.
Let's say you manage to just like mandate the snot out of this thing and you
Mhm.
get 99% compliance, right? And
Mhm.
you wave the banner and you go, everybody did it. Everybody did it. And let's prove the ROI.
Mhm.
And a lot of times it's like, well, you look at the numbers after the fact, and honestly, even if they go up, I am very cautious in telling people to go march in the parade and say, that was learning. Learning did it.
Exactly.
Because you're like, well, did it? I mean,
That's
what if there was a
exactly it.
market
Right.
dynamics change? What if, I mean, you might see the numbers tank and it might be because, oh, well, last week, the tech companies tanked on their earnings call and everybody tightened the pocket strings and everybody goes, well, see, 99% compliance, they've met, it failed. But this behavioral piece, I've been able to shut down more. But again, this is where you change the definition of return.
Yep.
Because if
Exactly.
you automatically are trying to tie return to did our EPS go up?
Exactly.
Okay, well, come on. But if you can say we set out to make sure, and I just think of let's use Chick-fil-A.
Sure.
If we set
Yeah.
out to make sure everyone says my pleasure, we
Mhm.
want to make sure everybody does that with every interaction. We can now, what you're talking about, we can show they do. They know
Yep.
how to do it.
Exactly.
So there's no argument of, okay, before we had 60% people that did it and did it
Mhm.
well. Now we've got 90. We moved
Exactly.
that needle 90%. Now, whether or not that translates to business results, that's not necessarily L&D's problem to solve. It's to say, well, we did that. If it doesn't work, maybe we go back and say, maybe my pleasure wasn't really where it was breaking down.
Mhm.
Let's readjust our focus and maybe we shift it. So I think
Yeah.
that's where the shift in thinking around measurement needs to happen. But I think this does demonstrably change the conversation where people go, this is a training problem. And
Yeah.
you go, I mean, not according to the measurement. Everybody can do it. The fact they're
Mhm.
not,
Exactly. And
I
that's
don't know.
exactly it. It takes it a step further than did the course get completed to did the learning actually get applied, right? And that's what Bongo is facilitating is can they apply what they learned in that real world setting? And the Chick-fil-A example is, although a more straightforward one, a great one because we can all relate to it. It's the organization Chick-fil-A is identified. If they say that phrase, then
They've done
that's like a
that.
KPI that
Yeah.
they measure of, okay, customer satisfaction. People like receive that catch up a little happier, right?
Yes.
And so they're encouraging, and in some cases like holding their employees, from a compliance
Accountable.
standpoint, accountable to saying that. And that's what Bongo can facilitate. And
Yeah.
another, maybe for like a different example might be, for Microsoft, they might be trying to get all of the people that resell Microsoft products to say the phrase Azure is better than AWS because, or
Right.
something specific like that. Our tool can automatically identify that. Microsoft can throw 30,000 salespeople at the tool or at
And
the
see how
video
many are actually
assignments.
doing that.
Exactly. And then they're, not just looking at or having to be constrained to look at course completion. They're able to have a more business intelligence kind of conversation of, hey, this was identified as an important critical thing by product marketing.
Yep.
We're going through this
We need to
course,
actually see this
the learning
demonstratively used
outcome.
more frequently. Well,
Exactly.
and I
Like it leads
think,
to the learning outcome that's desired.
and the thing with it is this gets back to this, a lot of times we talk about wanting a seat at the table and what is our
Mhm.
strategic relationship with the business. And this to me is really where the
It is the
rubber meets the
bridge.
road on this. This is
Exactly.
like, well, this is where you're in your lane and they're in their lane and you're driving down the track together because you're
Yeah.
not trying to come up with what words are the ones that make the biggest difference. It's like you're in L&D. That, I mean, you may have ideas, but it's not really your place to say, I know what words are going to change the business. It's your words to say, okay, you figure that out. Tell me what we need to do. Then we will make sure that that behavior is changing to
That's exactly
match what you're saying needs to happen. And then we have a strategic business conversation when it doesn't work, but instead of just finger pointing of, well, the training didn't work. No, you're not holding your
Yeah.
people. And we're all like,
What's
Okay,
going
but
on?
do we even know if do we even know if anybody's actually able to do this?
Totally.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm not 100% sure. We never really checked that type
Mhm.
of a thing. This changes the conversation dramatically.
Exactly. That's like I said earlier, it's like the adage, what gets measured gets done. And then because there's a measurements, something that you can reference that's tangible, then there's, like you were referencing, like there's an actual conversation can happen between L&D and customer service, or L&D and
Yep.
sales, or L&D and leadership training or development. Like there's actual tangible conversation, and like something to reference, right? Like,
Yeah.
well, this group of learners didn't say this, and lo and behold, they're not as good at pitching the product.
Right. Well, and I think the thing that's with that, and this goes back to a lot of conversations I have, is this requires change in the way L&D operates, in the way we think, and the way we even operate as a function. Because everything we're talking about now even changes your approach to assessing needs. I mean, you're asking different questions now, because instead of just saying, what do we need to tell them? You've actually got to dig into what are they not doing that we want them to be doing? Like even the example of Microsoft. What things are they not saying in those conversations that we think if we get them saying this kind of stuff, if they're using these words, if they're bringing up these kind of topics? I mean, I remember doing product work. We don't have to get into the where, but and it really was about how you represented the product. The marketing team knew how the product was represented, translated into deals. That was their deal. They did millions of dollars of analysis to know if we talk about it this way, if we make comparisons to this product, if we do this and that. Like, they knew. It wasn't our job to go like figure that out. But we were able to work with them. But it was a different conversation, with saying, well, how are conversations happening today? What would we like those to be on the other side? And then let's build a pathway that takes them from point A to point B. And let's assess along the way, are they actually growing in that? And if not, then why?
Exactly. And that's like, would be a slam dunk use case for Bongo, right? And we have a lot of product teams that we work with where they're leveraging Bongo because they've invested and done a bunch of research and know where to throw shade and where to emphasize. But to date, there hasn't been a tool that holds those, in this case, salespeople accountable to pitching it the right way. And that's what Bongo can facilitate. And both from the structured video assessment, from the auto analysis, and then more recently, we have this new capability that we're calling phrase gen, which we were talking a little bit about it prior. And
I know this is one like years ago. I was like, somebody needs to make this, and everybody's like, I don't really understand what you're talking about. And so I was jazzed.
Yeah, so effectively what that can do is it can ingest source material, right? So that use case that you just mentioned, where it's around a product team, or product marketing, they've already figured out and created battle cards, or maybe like the 70-page PowerPoint. Our tool with phrase gen can ingest that source material through natural language processing, and AI can directionally figure out, okay, this document or this material is trying to get this thing across. And then it'll run the algorithms again and identify keywords or key phrases that support that direction, right? So,
so it's a two-step part. Like, you're taking the source material of, again, and for folks, if you're not familiar with like battle cards, it's a sales thing. They've got like their battle card that here's key product features, value propositions, all this stuff. So it's quick, or a product deck. So it's actually ingesting some of that source content to see what matters out of this type of, that's the first part, right?
Exactly. And it, it's a two-part thing. Like, philosophically, that's how it's architected, but it happens in like fractions of a second.
Well, I mean, that's the beauty of machine learning. Things that used to take lots of people hours to sit and try and go through and arguing in a conference room over which word they liked best. Machine learning's doing it in a fraction of that.
Exactly. But, the beauty is, just this kind of, we were just talking about, equipping or empowering L&D teams, right? Where the sales organization or the product marketing organizations figured out, how to frame or how to position the product, and they've created assets or things around that. You can effectively, as an L&D professional, through Bongo, ingest that material. It'll then pick out, okay, here's the most important elements. Here's the things that should be said by the learners, and then
Okay.
we'll automatically calibrate the auto analysis to verify, did this, in this case, the salespeople say what they were supposed to according to the product team. And
Okay.
all of that happens, again, automatically, and
Which is reducing the burden in some regards. And going back to what
massively.
we were saying on the design team, instead of us having to sit and go through and try and figure out like
Yep.
that, we're
What is
actually
the
allowed.
important part? Yeah, we don't
Right.
have
What
to
is the
figure out
important part? Like, I mean,
Exactly.
and a lot of time can go into that. You
Oh,
can
yeah.
say, I mean, I've done it myself. You've got these massive decks and you're
Yeah.
like, good
Yeah, so
freaking grief. I don't know what we should be looking for in this.
exactly. And that's exactly, this is, millions of dollars and over a year in engineering that is taken to develop this. And, but that's effectively what it boils it down to is,
Now, how does
instead
the
of taking
workflow with
hours, it
that
takes
work? I'm
seconds.
curious, is with that piece. So there's the
Mhm.
workflow to ingest your source content,
Yep.
and then analyze it and kind of come up with like, here's kind of some of the things that we're looking for. But then on the other end, as a user, how is it the same video workflow that's
Yep.
happening that? Okay, so it's the
Yes,
same video
same
workflow that then that
workflow.
they're kind of saying whatever, and it's analyzing then what they're doing and then matching it back to whatever
Yep.
the source file was.
Exactly. And then it'll give you a little score of like, hey, you said these key phrases, here's the ones you missed, or here's a bunch of filler words that you put in there. Probably need to, practice again here.
Okay. Okay.
But yeah, from
Well,
from an authoring standpoint, it takes it from what would be, before we had this functionality, hours for an L&D person.
Well, that's what I was going to say from a
figure
speed to
out-
market standpoint.
Yeah. It takes it from hours to, like a couple minutes, maybe.
Okay.
And that's a huge, I would say, like, element. So not only is it lifting up the accountability and having the, like, what gets measured gets done kind of reference, but it's also becomes more of like a business intelligence, like a BI type use case, as opposed to just like a fun way to assess and evaluate people.
Well, so on this, because that last piece you talked about, so again, this is where a lot of this stuff, when you look at it, it's easy to look at a tool and kind of go, oh, okay, like tool would help with this.
Mm-hmm.
But this really does impact your entire operational flow with type things. But I like the acceleration piece, because to your point, that can be a lot of work if it's, hey, we need to do a product assessments and we want to do skill validation.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And that's
that's a lot. Like how many products
yeah.
do we have? I mean, one company I was with, it was like 329, and you're like, oh, I mean, how many product decks are we going to have to sit and go through and figure? And so we ended up just kind of winnowing it down and being like, well, what are the top 5 products? Because from a capability, that really was what we had the capacity to look at. But again, I think what you're describing with using machine learning is to say, well, why do you have to stop at 5? Mm-hmm. Because as long as that source material is there, which it is, because marketing's spending boatloads of money making sure it's there, and you have that raw content.
Component of L&D is, somebody's creating content, whether it's
somebody's creating it somewhere
or externally brought in. The content's, a core part of L&D. Bongo is marrying to that content, holding learners accountable to it and getting them to apply it in a real world setting. But to your points, this is the case with, I would say, like almost all of our corporate L&D customers, where they might have, a team of hundreds or thousands of employees. And, there might be a team of 2,000 employees, but the L&D shop is like,
it's like
2 people. Right. So the burden for them is, they're always like totally have a ton of weight on their shoulders. And that's a big thing that we've seen our customers be able to benefit from, is they don't have to make as many compromises like you were just saying. And, they don't have to choose like, okay, what are the 5 products we're going to support? they can ingest materials or the things that are already created, and be able to, have a much bigger footprint, have a seat at a, at a table at a higher floor, if you will, like, a more,
nicer
a seat at
carpet
the
or
table
something like that. Yeah.
yeah, it's they're able to actually be involved in the conversations of like, hey, how do we actionalize this new functionality? And how do we equip and enable our sales organization to actually talk about why our new functionality is competitive against our competition? And that's really the core, one of the core use cases that we're seeing at Bongo is, being able to do those interactions, to engage with those learners in a really high touch, meaningful way, but at a highly scalable way too.
Well, and it's an important note to hit on with this, because one of the things that does come up sometimes when we start hearing automation, machine learning, AI is starting coming, there can be this tendency of like, well, but that's what I do. So if this is going to be done automated, what's my role? And to me, I look at it and go, I mean, your role is changing, yes, but for the better. And
that's
I don't
exactly
think,
what I would argue.
I mean, it's for the better.
Yeah.
And on top of it, I have yet to be in an organization where we've even come close. I mean, even remotely close to going, you know what? We've done all the things.
Yep, exactly.
I mean, we've done all the things. That's it. I don't know. There's just nothing left to do because we've just done it all. And so I think that fear of, well, might this take from the value we're bringing? I would say absolutely not. Because again, going back to that example of, rather than saying, well, we can really only do this for 5 products because this is pretty massive in terms of intent. It's like, well, no, we can actually support the entire portfolio. That's because we're augmenting our people and can do more with less.
Exactly.
More with more, I guess.
And that's I would 100% agree. Like, the role will change, but it's going to change to a more important role. And the learning will change, but change to a more impactful outcome, as opposed to, just looking at completion. Completion rates are important, but
they're
like
a factor.
They're a factor, but like if that's all that's being looked at, that's a missed opportunity, and something that I think equipping our customers and equipping our L&D professionals with tools like Bongo makes their role organizationally more important, more impactful to business success.
No, I would agree.
Yeah. So
well, and even just the example of, I mean, again, but this is a real challenge that you have to face, because it is different, and different can feel uncomfortable, and you can feel like, well, but my job used to be making all these things or reviewing the 200 PowerPoint decks and trying to come up with the most important things. Like, that was my job. And it's like, well, yeah, but that's not the higher order skills you really bring to the table. Why not spend more of your time on that higher order, consulting conversations, working with the business? But that does lead me to a follow-up question on that, which is, so with that, and I think this is one of the things where sometimes people get a little leery with machine learning is, okay, so it can ingest this content. It comes up with its criteria based on what you put in. Here's what I think I'm assessing. The reality is it happens where sometimes that material is garbage, right? Or there's a lot of garbage in it, type of a thing. And you may not just want to blindly go, well, the algorithm said this is what's important, so let it out the door. Is there the ability to say, hey, before we, put this out to the masses and start giving people feedback, we have a chance to look at what are the criteria it's coming up with and assessing? Because we may say, and again, well, answer that question first, and then I'll go to the
the answer is absolutely. So all the algorithms are doing is making a recommendation of, here's the 10 words that we think the algorithm thinks are really important. You human, you L&D professional or sales subject matter expert, validate that these are the important things, and maybe add some, maybe take away. But it's, that's where it's taking the hours that Formally,
Yeah, you would spend reading the deck.
Exactly. To, okay, now just like validate that these are the important aspects, and it takes it from what was hours into minutes of authoring, high touch, high engagement.
Well, and I wanted to bring that point up because, again, this is where sometimes people freak and then they bail because they go, well, we just can't trust an algorithm, an algo to do this. And it's like, no, legitimately, you shouldn't, because that's when bad things happen, where you're just like, hey, we put the deck in and it's telling everybody to do its thing. And then you look at the day and go, wait, what? But this also opens, and here's the other thing, we're going back to this higher order thing. A lot of times in our seats, we see some of this stuff and we go, from like a development, I don't know that this is really as helpful to people, or it's really sending the message you think it is. But a lot of times that becomes subjective because we say, well, we don't think this. And of course our counterparts go, well, what do you know? You're L&D, like stay out of our business type of a thing. But what this actually does is allows you to play that strategic role of saying, our tools are actually looking at this, and based on analyzing it, this is the kind of coaching and development it's seeing from the content you're creating. Is that accurate? And and then they give them a chance to go, that's weird. Why is it coming up? Well, it's based on and that becomes then a strategic conversation, not only on how you may be developing your people and saying, hey, okay, well, let's change the criteria, but also a strategic discussion with your business partners to say, we might actually want to change some of the things because honestly, based on this is the message it's sending, which is why it's saying we should develop on this. But if that's not right, maybe not only should we change our coaching criteria, maybe we should also change the source content to better align to that. And that becomes less of a you versus me, turf war, but a discussion.
Exactly. It's a discussion, and it's where it's both parties are like equal discussion. It's not throw it over the fence.
It's two parties talking about what the AI said
here.
Let's really talk about what's important here.
Exactly. And that's exactly what Bongo equips L&D people with, or equips course creation with, is both the measurement tool, but also the digital asset, right? You can say, hey, wouldn't it be nice to see the salespeople practice a pitch, or see how they, when they're faced with the objection, like, I love your product, but the price is too high. How do they handle that objection?
What do they say? And what should they be saying?
Exactly.
Based on data versus just like, I don't know, like go with your gut.
Exactly.
I don't know that that's really a good strategy.
Exactly. So, and like I was mentioning, it allows L&D organizations to have, I guess you just hit it on the head, where it's an actual discussion or dialogue.
It's a discussion.
It's
a business discussion. It's no longer, and I've been that designer before. I've been the designer where you get the thing and you're like, you want me to make something out of this? Like, this is a hot mess, and you want me to design something and create a learning pathway. I mean, and this is what I have to work with, because they do become a Franken piece of work. It's like, oh, tell them this, tell them this. Pretty soon the whole kitchen sinks in. And I think that's where this is actually an opportunity to say, hey, we're sending a lot of messages to people. And we're trying to come up with something, but now instead of it's just my opinion, this now becomes something. Again, I think there's tremendous potential with even this line of thinking, and regardless of how you're approaching it, this is how some of these new emerging technologies can change the seat we have, change the discussion we have, but it requires us to think differently and act differently. One other point though that I want to bring up and just kind of see if you have some perspective, or if you've gotten some ancillary feedback on this. We've talked a lot about the benefit to our stakeholders, which is important. They're the ones cutting our checks, so we obviously want them to be happy, because it's not fun being on the other end of like, so what does L&D do here type of a thing. And we've been there.
For sure.
It's great when our internal operations can streamline and all this stuff. I mean, that's fantastic when we can do that. But sometimes what gets lost in the conversation is the actual employee. It's like we say employee-centric design, learner-centric design, design thinking, all this. And then it's like, they're kind of an afterthought. It's like, but I do want to talk about the fact that this actually is not like impeding their experience, because people do want feedback. And a lot of times that's the missing cog for people in their learning experiences. Like, you asked me to do all this stuff. You forced me to go through it. You sent it my way. You told me it's important. And I have absolutely zero way of, one, demonstrating that I know how to do it so that you can stop sending me through the same course that I told you I know how to do already.
For sure.
Or be able to actually say, you know what? Wow, I'm not as comfortable with this, but nobody's ever taken the time to give me at least rapid feedback so I can change my behavior, practice, try again, and actually improve. And I think that's one of the things where, while we're talking a lot about these other ancillary things, this actually is impacting the employee development experience in a positive way.
Yeah, I absolutely impacting the employee. And, really, they're the one, they're the party getting the most benefit. And, it's probably best said. So one of our other customers, Cognizant, is they coined the phrase, I guess, like, for us, or in describing our tool, and that it's giving judgmental free feedback, right? So the auto analysis, it's human nature to, like, want to impress your boss or want to impress the stakeholders that be. And, when you're using a tool, like Gong, for instance, where it's recording a sales interaction, but it's all retroactive, then when you're getting feedback there, because it already took place, like, you just
bomb that customer call. The last thing you want to do is have, like, your boss and every leader being like, oh, wow, you really dropped the ball there.
Exactly. And so that environment creates the learner, so the employee, it puts them in defensive mode from the get-go. Whereas with Bongo, it's all proactive learning, and it's specifically housed, or that the environment is supposed to be, with, at least with the auto analysis and the automated feedback, is centered around, I'm just getting feedback from algorithms. So it's like, nobody's here judging me or like thinking harshly. And we actually had,
judging my character, who I am as a person. It's simply listening to what I said and saying, hey, you said way too many times, and you talk too fast. Take it down a notch.
And that's, it's absolutely applicable in corporate learning. But we had a university do an IRB study about a year ago that, so it's, peer reviewed, and it's like a legitimate study. And they were looking at right when the auto analysis came out, and they were looking at, does this facilitate more practice? And the finding was two core findings. One, the amounts that people practiced when auto analysis was available was 365%.
I was going to say it had to have skyrocketed.
People practice, their pitch or whatever they're being evaluated on 3.5 times more compared to not having that available. But then the other outcome that I think is even cooler is, it turns out that the knowledge retention, right? So actually being able to, like, recall that knowledge and apply it, dramatically improved the more complicated the subject matter, right? So, that simple example of saying my pleasure at Chick-fil-A, like, not a huge correlation there.
No, pretty easy to pick up and get the hang of it. It's not terribly complicated.
It's pretty straightforward. But when asked an open-ended question around, like, objection handling of, like, oh, I know the competitor does X, Y, and Z, and then how do they overcome that? Or, like, that example with Telestra in the call center of, those are usually, customers that are interacting with the employee from, like, a harsh, so there's some problem is why they called. So, a learning outcome of being able to calm the conversation down and get it to a productive, positive outcome is really important. And, and that's where there's even more, like, very strong correlation between using Bongo and auto analysis in that practice.
So what's funny about this, I love when people have, like, actual research and data that backs things, that have backed, like, my personal just experience. Cause I'm like, here's what my experience has been. And I hate saying this is how it is for sure, because it's like, well, I'm not a researcher. I don't do this at scale, whatever, but I observe these things. And what's interesting about the point you bring up is, a lot of times we say, well, people don't have time to practice. They won't really do it. And I'm like, they will though. The problem is they don't like feeling, one, judged. It's a terrible feeling to feel judged, and people don't want to practice when they feel judged or if it's out there. And they also hate doing things as practice and not getting feedback, which a lot of times is what happens. Hey, record this video, put it on SharePoint. You might hear something in 3 years. Okay, I'm not going to take the time to do that for the possible meaningless or not time-bound feedback I get. And it doesn't surprise me that you'd see such an exponential growth when you automate and make it a safe place to do something and get feedback. Because I've had very similar experiences. And the other one that you brought up that's interesting is that complicated thing. We ran a group exercise once where, and again, this is one of my like circumstantial, like whatever, we did it. And the data seems to support, my experiential data supports what you said. Was the question was hard. It was, describe how artificial intelligence is changing the way our product is used in a workflow.
Okay. Yeah.
And it was like, say what? Yeah. Like what? That is a hard thing to articulate. Yeah. But people wanted to get good at it because they're like, I get asked that. I go into this and I go, we have AI. And the immediate response from a customer is, how's it work?
Yeah.
And I don't know the answer. And I want to get better at it, but I don't know how to get better at it. And I'm afraid to go do it in front of my peers and have them go, well, that was awful. Like, wow, you don't know. Yeah. They don't want to do it there. Exactly. They don't want to do it somewhere and never hear back because they've got to do this 10, 15 times a day. And it was amazing, like you said, how much they used it and how much better they got at answering those specific questions. But to the L&D standpoint, it took a lot of work to get us back to what question do we need to develop the right behaviors in our people to actually change the business. And that's where we spent our time, which goes back to that higher order thinking.
Yep, exactly. And then you know, probably to the business with that use case or example, it's a more actionable like business outcome, right? The customer facing people can actually have an intelligent conversation around something that customers are really interested in. Like that would be an absolute slam dunk use case for
it was. And we weren't even, I mean, we were using different whatever approach to it, but that's why I was excited about this, because I've seen this kind of shift in thinking in L&D have a big impact on the impact you have, the relationships you have with the business, the employee experience. I mean, this really does tie to a lot of these things that we talk about in Ether. You know, we want to make things personalized, improve the learner experience, yada, yada, yada. And it's like, right, but how? How are you doing this in a way that's actually meaningful?
Totally.
Okay. Yep. I told you I'm not going to, because there's about 4 other areas that I really want to dig into, but it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen in 2 minutes and 12 seconds. For sure. So I'm gonna call it a day on this one, because Josh, this has just been a phenomenal conversation. I'm so glad that you're able to come back, because this is another reason why I encourage vendors to come back on the show, because over time things change. I mean, your product is dramatically different than what it was 2 years ago, year and a half ago when we had this conversation. So I appreciate you making the time and joining me and letting me know what you all are up to. You've got some exciting stuff.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. And yeah, it's been awesome to see the evolution of the product, and just, you know, how our customers are applying it is almost more remarkable.
Yeah,
as
awesome.
Number of use cases out there.
Well, enjoy your remaining weeks before you're losing sleep with the newest addition to the fam. And yeah, let's stay in touch. And I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful rest of your week. Thanks everybody for tuning in. Hopefully you got something valuable, regardless of the products you're using, but in your way of thinking about measuring skill and capability in your teams.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. See ya.